This is Find Your Dream Job, the podcast that helps you get hired, have the career you want, and make a difference in life. I'm your host, Mac Pritchard. I'm also the founder of Mac's List. It's a job board in the Pacific Northwest that helps you find a fulfilling career. Every Wednesday, I talk to a different expert about the tools you need to find the work you want. One of the most effective ways to enjoy success in your career is to cultivate an inner circle of advisors. Here to talk about the difference such a group can make in your job search and your professional life is Soumary Vongrassamy. She's a specialist in equity and conflict resolution with the Multnomah County government in Portland, Oregon. Soumary, here's where I want to start. What do you mean when you talk about an inner circle for your career?
I can start with my own personal story, why that has worked for me and why I think it works for a lot of folks. The world of work is really designed for white men to succeed, and that's just how it is. And as a woman, as a person of color, and who was raised in poverty, we face tremendous barriers, and it's too heavy to manage alone. And you're trying to navigate it and trying to succeed through the world of work. Doing it on your own is just not feasible, and it's not healthy. And so, and I've gone through the business school. I went through school for HR and marketing. And thankfully, they've taught you very well how to play the game, how to dress the part, how to get through interviews, how to find your jobs. But it's exhausting. It's exhausting when you have to turn parts of yourself, parts of your identity to be able to succeed and navigate that. And so from that, I was able to really cultivate my own inner circle, a group of folks to hold me accountable, to remind me to lean into my own natural strength so that I'm not forgetting to turn parts of myself off in order to succeed. And so those include things like listening to my own intuition, brokering multiple social identities and how to navigate different cultural groups, and also caring for the collective, the whole, and the community.
Well, I want to dig into each of those topics. I'm curious, why do you think people try to go it alone? Do they just not know any better, Soumary? Or because, as you said, because of your education, you learned models that you learned that there is a different way. But why do you think people try to do it by themselves?
I think there's multiple factors. There's the world of work is, where we just need to be productive and we need to show our own individual strengths. But then we're also in America's a very individualistic society where, to each his own. There's so many expressions that you can learn about how to show up as your own selves. And it's a highly competitive world. Now with politics and sports and, businesses, awards, it's just, there's a lot of competition, and it just really feeds into the very individualistic society. And so it's hard to kind of step out of that and really see that we are a collective, we are whole, that we do operate in social groups. But trying to balance that is very difficult.
Now, you've talked about the difference an inner circle has made in your own career, and I know you have colleagues who rely on these groups too. Can you give an example of the kind of difference having an inner circle of advisors can make in either a job search or career?
Yeah, I know there's, I know you've done some last sessions before around having groups of advisors. So it looks very different. I'm just going to speak personally from my experience as a woman of color. And I can share some helpful tips. For example, if I'm sourcing employers and I'm looking for the right employer for me, I will have to ask myself and ask my friends to tell me, is this employer going to support me as an Asian American woman in a leadership position? And that looks very different than just saying, oh, this culture looks really great, they provide the right benefits, but in the end, will the organization, will the manager support me as an Asian American woman in a leadership position? If I'm sourcing a job, if I'm looking at a job description, I have to check in with myself and my inner circle saying, hey, is the job responsibilities and expectations allowing me to really meet my values, uphold my values, and use the natural strengths that I have and that I can contribute. It means everything from being an introvert to being community oriented to being soft-spoken. So how do we make sure that there's this that job actually is designed for me to succeed.
Well, let's talk about the circle itself, because those are excellent insights, and so they've got to be so invaluable when you're either considering pursuing a position or actually interviewing for one. How do you build an inner circle of advisors, Soumary, and who do you ask to be part of it?
There's a lot of proactiveness around building an inner circle. It's a lot of relationship building, taking the time, and you can call it networking, you can call it friend making, just being out there and growing your own social network without the expectation that it is for work. Because in the end, these are the folks that will understand you, and all of your natural strengths, your vulnerabilities, and they're the ones that would be really able to tell you the truth about whether something makes sense for you or not. I think that's by far the most helpful. And it's really just leaning into that closer circle. It's not going out to find like an expert that does resume writing. It's really just leaning into, like, perhaps I have a friend who has managed a team of 10 and has done countless interviews. I'm sure they could be able to go through my resume and tell me if there's some things that I'm underselling myself, or if there are things I can better articulate. So that would be one example, but it really takes a lot of patience, a lot of time to be out. And there's many ways you can build relationships. You don't have to just always go to networking events. You can cultivate it within your own social circle.
Is this a formal group generally, or is it based on your needs while you're progressing through your career, or perhaps doing a job search? In other words, are you actually pulling people together for a call or a meeting of some kind, or are you identifying people who might help while you've got a specific need?
For me personally, it's a more casual group. For others that do need a little bit more formal structure, I'm sure a mastermind group would be very helpful for them too. So it looks different for everyone. I have the folks that I go to when I need to be leaning into career advice on meeting my needs. I have someone to help with negotiation and salary transparency. I have folks I lean into for interview practice. It looks different for everyone, but for me personally, I have a more casual network that I often go to, and I do ask for help. And if they're available, fantastic. If not, I'm okay with that too. And I have other folks I can lean into. But some people have it more structured. They say, hey, I'm going to be hopping into a job search right now. Would you be able to step in this kind of role for me? And there's some folks that have reached out to me in that kind of formal request. And yes, that there are different ways to do it.
And for people who do like more formal structures, does it take the form of a one-time conversation where perhaps you give feedback about a resume, or is it an ongoing relationship where you might meet occasionally to talk about specific challenges?
For the folks that have reached out to me with formal settings, it is an ongoing conversation. I've looked at resumes over and over for the same person, right? Just making sure it's differentiated for different jobs. They're not underselling their skill sets. So yeah, it could look different for everyone, but for the folks that have reached out for a more formal setting, it is a more ongoing basis. And for me personally too, it's always the same folks that I would reach out to.
And when you reach out to people, what do you recommend to a listener who might be uncertain about what to ask for? Does, again, it come back to a specific request, like an introduction to a particular employer, or perhaps a review of a resume? What do you see as most effective, Soumary?
It depends on who you are and where you're at, what you feel like you need help with. I think I already named a few things, right? Sourcing employers, sourcing jobs, folks who help out with resume cover letters. Then interviewing, and then negotiation. Those are huge buckets that you can go any one to focus on. I tend to make sure I have the whole suite for myself so that I'm not swimming alone, and I like the consistency, and which is really helpful. But some folks just need it to zero in on one of them, and you should lean into maybe your former managers or your colleagues that are in the space of hiring to let you know what are the areas that you can need help in. But it looks different for everyone, right?
And in your experience, both for yourself and for people that you've worked with in the past, is this a big group of people, or are we talking about maybe 5 or 7 individuals in all that might be part of your inner circle?
Oh, mine is relatively large. I'm also, as an extrovert, I tend to lean into many groups. So I have like a book club that we do career transitioning together. I have a group of women that talks through like leaning into our intuition. I have a group of women of color that we talk about our salaries and our benefits, and we compare notes and how do we help each other leverage and grow. So I'm blessed in that space, like where I can tap into multiple groups. Or some folks that maybe are more introverted, a small group of 5 would be sufficient, or even 2.
I'm impressed that you have a group focused just on salary negotiation. I'm curious, how did that get started, and how do you continue it? Are you all just comparing notes regularly?
Yeah, so this is very interesting. So a few of my friends, all women of color, we went to a session where it was acknowledged that the lack of transparency around salaries that keeps us all in the dark, and we're not able to make the right decisions for ourselves. So it just became a natural conversation, and then we all shared our salaries and what the benefits that come with it, and knowing that we have well wishes for each other to do our best and get our best. And so recognizing that we care about each other, we were quite comfortable with sharing. And then that led into all sorts of conversations on supporting each other. And we weren't comparing who's better or not, or who's better or who's gaining more. It was really supporting where everyone was starting at. And then I carried that conversation to another group. There's Asian American women group that I'm with that we do brunch every month. And I said, hey, in this other group, this is what we shared. And then we started talking about our salaries in that space too, which looked very different. And we talked about more benefits because many of them were mothers. And so they're trying to figure out what is the right family plans and the benefits that they should be advocating within their organizations. So it's almost like a bit of an awakening, and we had this veil just lifted, and we were able to be honest and be open to talking about it. And I work in government where our salaries are quite open, and that makes it a little easier to start talking about how to make sure that it's equitable and that we're being paid fairly. And it helps us talk about conversations about our worth. Too often we don't know, are we making enough, or and what is our worth? How do we know what is our worth?
Okay. It's fascinating. I want to take a break, Soumary, but when we come back, I'd like to talk more about how those groups and that have grown, it sounds as if very organically and informally, continue. So stay with us when we come back. Soumary Vongrassamy and I will continue to talk about how to cultivate and serve an inner circle for your career. One of my top takeaways from today's conversation with Soumary is the importance of community. You don't need to go it alone. Recognize instead that a job search is a team effort. Those you know well, and often not so well, stand ready to help. And you also need to understand what matters to employers too. Every hiring manager you meet wonders if you're the one who can do the best job. That's why companies ask behavioral questions. What will you say when you get one of these questions? Go to maxlist.org/questions. We'll send you a free guide with a list of the 100 most popular behavioral questions. Go to maxlist.org/questions. Of course, there's an infinite number of behavioral questions, so we'll teach you a simple 4-part system to answer any of them. Get your free guide today. 100 behavioral interview questions you need to know. That's maxlist.org/questions. Now, let's get back to the show. We're back in the MaxList studio. I'm talking with Soumary Vongrassamy. She's a specialist in equity and conflict resolution with the Multnomah County government in Portland, Oregon. So, Mary, before our break, we were talking about some groups that you're involved in that grew, it sounds like, very organically, that are focused on sharing information about salaries and career opportunities. I'm curious, how do those groups continue? Is what keeps people swapping information and continuing to meet to exchange information and ideas?
Oh, I believe, I mean, it's not just myself, but a number of my friends are extroverts and event planners and love to eat and break bread. And so these are our excuses to always come together. And we do make it a regular occurrence. Many of them are just monthly meetings, book clubs, brunches. Others we try to do every other month, whether because of childcare factoring. I have amazing friends that want to keep it going, and it actually shows during this time with the pandemic happening that despite it all, we're moving it virtually, and we do virtual hangouts and groups and continue that connection because it's so invaluable.
Are there things that you recommend that a listener who might be part of an inner circle of advisors or is cultivating one not ask advisors to do?
I think a question that I often forget, and I have to be very intentional to remind myself, is have the folks that know you well to remind you or help you see whether that job is the right fit for you. Too often we go after jobs because of titles and pay and prestige or power. But in the end, does that job speak to you where perhaps you're an introvert and this job is all sales? Like, how would it fit your needs and your natural disposition? And often we don't ask that because we just go after those other things. And it's helpful to just be reminded, will this speak to you and will it help you be more authentic in this new job, in this new role?
What's an effective way to do that kind of reality check? Do you recommend, if you're interested in the position, even before you apply, that you talk to one of your advisors and just get their feedback?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I'll give you, and one example is there was an opportunity to lead a team, and I had to really sit with that, for someone that, am I more of an individual contributor and would rather not manage a team? Even though I might have the skill sets to be strategic and coordinate a whole team, but I had to check in with some of my friends that knew me well and they just gave me some guidance, not tell me what to do, but really coach me through it and saying, hey, what does your day look like if you were to manage a team? And would you be zapped? Would your energy be zapped by the end of the day, or would you be fulfilled? And so I really had to just check in the folks that are a little bit more intuitive and that pay attention to those pieces. And I'm grateful for that.
Well, I have to ask the question that I'm sure is on a listener's mind. Did you pursue the position, or did you decide to focus on something else instead?
I did not. I did not pursue the opportunity, a fantastic opportunity, but I'm quite... and I'm pleased with it. I think I really did pay attention to what I was more naturally inclined to, and that is just deep work as an individual contributor. And yeah.
Many of our listeners are doing a job search, and you've given great examples of how a listener might turn to a circle of advisors for specific help, say about a resume or question about how skills or interest in a position might actually match up with a person's abilities. Once somebody finds a job, how do you recommend a listener stay in touch with a circle of advisors?
Oh, sure. Pay it forward, please. You've gone through that process. It's fresh in mind, and you can share out what lessons learned, help others to not repeat maybe some of the frustrations that you had gone through. And, with us where we're at now, with the expectation of a really high unemployment rate, if this is going to be the call for all of us that are privileged to have stable jobs and support to be able to lend a hand for folks that will be leaning into us and would need help. So if you can, please pay it forward. And I'm very privileged to be in that place to be able to provide a little bit more clarity for folks that are just kind of getting lost in all the demands.
Yeah, it's an important point you're making, because while we've been talking about an individual's inner circle of advisors, people they know well, it's important too, isn't it, Soumary, to help people you don't know very well or who might even be strangers, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Just make yourself available, and there's so many platforms, right? And just say, hey, I'm available to look at people's resumes. I might not know you well, but I can maybe copy edit for you. There's so many ways we can show up for each other.
And often when people hear the word networking, which is another way of describing what we're talking about, they think it's just about asking others for help. But service is really important, isn't it?
Yeah. If you can reframe it as friend making, I think that would be a better, more proactive way to approach it.
Yeah. Well, it's been a terrific conversation. Tell us what's next for you, Soumary.
If I need to be centered with my values, we're going through such a very difficult period for all of us across the globe. We're collectively grieving right now, and I can imagine it's just a bit of a spiritual awakening for us. So I'm just currently focusing on how I can be there for my family, friends, and colleagues to grieve right now. I can't even focus on anything beyond this. So that's really what's next for me.
I appreciate you sharing that. I know that people can learn more about you and connect with you by visiting your LinkedIn profile. And when you think about all the useful tips you've shared today about cultivating an inner circle of advisors, what's the one thing you want a listener to remember?
Pay attention to your intuition. I think that just takes a little bit of practice and a bit of patience with yourself. And if you can just take a moment and just sit with your intuition, it can very much guide you with your career path.
You don't need to do your job search by yourself. Ask others for help and use resources like our free guide, 100 Behavioral Interview Questions You Need to Know. Go to maxlist.org/questions. Again, that's maxlist.org/questions. On our next show, our guest will be Toni Patterson. She's a career coach who helps smart, driven women get the salaries, promotions, and jobs they want. Because of the COVID-19 virus, most job interviews are now happening virtually. And that means you need to learn new skills. Toni and I will talk about her job interview tips for a stay-at-home world and what you need to do differently. I hope you'll join us. Until next time, thanks for letting us help you find your dream job.